Warren, who's a resident of Texas, and USAG's trainer, whose name escapes me. What's her name? The longtime trainer, Debbie Van Horn, who lived on the property. These people, Debbie Van Horn was in the rooms with him while he was doing this. I mean, these people need to be questioned. Maybe they did something wrong and maybe they didn't, but we don't know because the steps haven't been taken by law enforcement in Texas to find out. And that's wrong, and that's why we're here. Sure. I mean, I can tell you I had a conversation we represent a number of Olympians, with an Olympian who spoke to them 2 weeks ago and said, essentially, what are you doing about, the other people who enabled him? And it appeared to her, and the answer, I can't quote it, but the answer really was, well, we're focused on Nasser. And that's troubling. Consider for a moment if you were a parent of one of these children and you entrusted your child to the ranch. The parents weren't allowed at the ranch. There was no cell service. They were there alone. And there's a concept in law called in loco parentis, in the place of the parent. And you entrust your child to these people, and then you find out, in some cases, for 10 years, they were molested twice a day, 4 times a month. That's hundreds of times. I think that deserves a very serious criminal investigation. Very serious. And maybe it'll find nothing. But it deserves an investigation, and that hasn't happened. It deserves a search warrant. Not one search warrant? Not one? Come on. Seriously? Look at her computer. Look at their records. Look at his charts. Do something.
Can you address the Texas child protection statute?
Sure. I'm going to let Michelle do that.
Sure. There are a number of statutes. There is a specific statute in Texas that makes it a crime to fail to report aggravated sexual assault of a child or to stop it. It's also a crime under the Family Code to fail to report any child abuse immediately for any person who knows about it. It is a crime to endanger a child, not just intentionally, but also by omission or criminal negligence. And not to get into too much of the legalese, but they didn't have to intentionally hurt these women. But by their failures and by their omissions under Texas law, we believe that they maybe did. It sure looks like it. So they may also be responsible under endangering a child statute, injury to a child. I mean, we have concerns about tampering with evidence in cases like this where we know some of that may have been going on for self-preservation purposes and to help USAG and themselves. And, of course, perjury has been mentioned as well.
I didn't hear the question.
Do we have any evidence?
Well, you mean aside the fact they invited him for 20 years and let him be alone in the rooms with women in his hotel rooms? So keep in mind, we haven't been able to take anything other than very limited depositions. What we do know, for example, is that in 2011, Michaela Maroney reported to John Geddert that Larry Nassar was fingering her, who's a national team coach, who was at the ranch repeatedly. We know that that USAG's policies, which, by the way, Nassar helped write, their safety policies, specifically prevented girls from being alone in their rooms with any adult, man or woman. USAG was so obsessed with that, they wouldn't even let them be alone with male gymnasts who were also their same age on trips. But yet they were required, not allowed, required to go to Dr. Nassar's hotel room and be treated on his bed, or worse, Dr. Nassar would come to their hotel room and be treated on their bed internationally. He would go into their rooms, and Ms. Dancher and Ms. Antolin can address this, and abuse them in their beds, in their rooms at the Karolyi Ranch. At night, there was no security. If you had a problem, you had to call Dr. Nassar. I have yet for anyone at USA Gymnastics, any coach or anybody, to tell me who was in charge of security at the ranch. So it's not my job to do what the Attorney General does, but there is a lot of smoke, and of course we know there's fire in June of 2015 as to Mrs. Karolyi. And that needs to be looked into, given the volume. There were over 50 girls molested in Michigan after June of 2015, when she admits in her deposition she knew. 50, probably more. Does that answer your question? Right. Well, that is the crime, sir. You mean do I think that Marta Karolyi intentionally allowed Larry Nassar to molest children? No, I don't. I hope not. But do I think that when she became, we do know is when she became aware, under penalty of perjury, she testified to that he had molested or was accused of molesting of Olympians. You know, the girls in question were Michaela Maroney, gold medalist, Allie Raisman, gold medalist, Maggie Nichols, world champion. She found out that in June of 2015. Now, you know, I think any person of goodwill, when you find that out, the first thing you do is you call the police. The second thing you do is get on the phone to the other girls in that time period and say, we found this out, are you okay? Has anybody from USA Gymnastics called any of you and asked if you're okay? No. So, the reason reporting statutes exist, and Texas is probably the broadest statute in the country, is to prevent exactly what happened here. We need to take this person off the street and deny them access to their victim pool. And that's the problem here. Maybe there's more. I'm not saying there is or there isn't. That's not my job. My job is to basically prod the Attorney General to do the right thing. And I hope he does.
How much time did Larry Nassar spend at the Karolyi Ranch? We know he lived in Lansing, or he said.
Right.
And obviously worked for Michigan State. How much time did he spend here?
So, yeah, good question. So, in 1997 or 98, the USA Gymnastics system changed. And they began to require gymnasts to come to the Karolyi Ranch, which was the national team training center. In 2010 became an Olympic training center for 4 days a month, about 11 months a year. Miss Karolyi would have you believe that he was there once or twice a year. That's not true. All of our clients recall him being at almost every camp. Maybe he missed 1 or 2 a year, but the vast majority of the time he was there. So he was there 4 days a month from 98 until 2016. In the run-up to the Olympic Games and the World Championships, he's there from 45 to 30 days every day, giving these girls mandatory treatment. And it's important to remember, you didn't have a choice of whether you went to treatment. You had to go. So that's the answer. He wasn't at the ranch after that, but he went back to Michigan. She knew he was a Michigan State doctor, and she knew he treated gymnasts every night at John Geddert's gym, Twistars, in Michigan. So we're not saying that he came back to the ranch after June 2015. In fact, he wasn't there in June 2015. He was there in May. But that's when the disclosure happened in June. But he went back to Michigan and molested other girls. Had Miss Karolyi reported, and Mr. Penny reported, Mr. Fain reported, what they would have found is that he was under active criminal investigation by the Michigan State University Police in June of 2015 and for that entire year for doing precisely what he did to these girls in Texas. And he would have been arrested a year earlier, and she would not have been touched during that year, and 50 other little girls who were molested. And that's my point. That's exactly why we have reporting statute, because it allows you to stop it in its tracks and separate him from the victims.
And you're saying that Martha Karolyi knew that he committed crimes in Texas that the statute of limitations doesn't run out on?
Well, here's the requirement. If you have a suspicion, a reasonable suspicion, that a child has been physically, emotionally, or sexually abused, you must report, right? So when the president of the organization calls you and says, hey, your doctor's not coming back, who's been with you 20 years because he's alleged to have sexually assaulted Allie Raisman, Michaela Maroney, and Maggie Nichols, your obligation at that moment is to pick up the phone and call the police, okay? I think you also have an obligation to ensure, at least a moral obligation, if not a legal one, that he's separated from his victim pool. She didn't do that. Nor did Rhonda Fain, the head of the women's program, nor did Mr. Penny. Mr. Penny waited 5 weeks and then finally called the FBI. Instead, what they did is hire an unlicensed investigator to investigate whether they should report. Well, you had enough information to investigate, you had enough information to report. That's the law.
You're saying basically after June of 2015, what she did was nothing. What she was required to do something.
She did worse than nothing. She stayed silent, which is tantamount to actively concealing it. I mean, we know that some of the most famous names in gymnastics continue to go to the ranch. We now know they're victims, and nobody got them help. Most of those women on that team, on the Olympic team, I can tell you I represent Ashton Locklear, who's a 2016 Olympic alternate who lives in Houston, and she and her teammates learned about it on the television. That's the first time they heard about it. No one from USA Gymnastics ever called them and said, this isn't treatment, this is abuse. And we're really sorry. Instead, what USA Gymnastics did is they let Nasser put out a Facebook post and a false narrative that he was retiring so he could run for school board in Michigan. They absolutely knew he was doing that. He told them that was he was going to do, and that's what he did. And every day he would go to his office at Michigan State after June of 2015, and every week he would go to Twistars, and he would abuse little girls in that room, putting his bare hand in their vagina and their anus. And all the time, Mrs. Karolyi knew that allegation was there, and she did nothing. That deserves an investigation. Other questions? Ma'am.
My understanding is that the Texas Attorney General doesn't investigate sexual abuse cases. Are you just looking for exposure to the child?
That's not true, okay? So the Texas Attorney General's office can take over, like any other Attorney General's office, any case they choose. They need to coordinate this case because it's an interstate case. They're interstate crimes, and they're transnational and international crimes. This needs to be a coordinated investigation with other attorney generals, and they need to, even if he doesn't want to take it over, how about calling the DA in Walker County and saying, Joe, or whatever his name is, maybe you ought to look into this, and maybe you ought to execute a search warrant. I mean, what else do you need? You got a sworn deposition that says it, and nothing happened. So, I just want to, does anybody have any other questions? Over 20. In the course of his time at the ranch, I would estimate there's probably, what do we say, 200 women who were there. Many have come forward. Some probably haven't. But when you have, bronze medalists, gold medalists, silver medalists raising their hand and saying, this happened to me. I mean, clearly, USA Gymnastics' own policy, for example, basically said, we won't even address your complaint about child sexual abuse unless you file a written complaint to the president of the organization. Their own policy violated the state law in every state of the union. That was their written policy until this year. I just want to tell everybody, we have if you want to do individual interviews, we've got a banquet room across the street we reserve, so if you want to talk to any of the survivors one-on-one, they're available, and you just need to walk across the street and we'll accommodate you. Okay, thank you so much for coming.
All right, guys, if you're watching with us, welcome to the stream. We're live here in the Fox 5 DC newsroom, bringing you all the digital streams, all the live stuff that we have coming in today. That was Attorney General in Texas, Ken Paxton. He is following up on requests from U.S. gymnasts who were abused by Larry Nassar to continue on an investigation into the Karolyi Ranch. If you remember, the Karolyis trained these gymnasts. They had a ranch from 1999 to present day. They recently closed it over in Huntsville, Texas, and they are being called upon to kind of look into when they knew about the abuse of these gymnasts by Larry Nassar and sort of if they had a part or any type of hand in knowing and covering it up or not, or sort of letting it go. And that's what this was all about. So we're going to continue to follow that story. Pretty interesting stuff right down there in Texas. As you know, if you've been following our stream, we covered all of those trials for Larry Nassar and some of those gymnasts, those notables that he also named just a few moments ago. On to something else that's happening back here in the D.C. area. Over at the Pentagon, they're updating the public on the mission in Africa last fall, where 4 Green Beret American soldiers actually died on a special forces mission in Niger. And this was an ambush, had to do with the Islamic State as well. Right now, live from the Pentagon, they're updating on what happened in that ambush last fall and what we need to know, what the Department of Defense will disclose to the public about that. So let's check into the Pentagon.
Analyzed thousands of pages of documents and photographs and watched hundreds of hours of video evidence. We reviewed news reports about the attacks and pursued leads to confirm or deny those reports. We returned to the site of the attack to conduct an investigative site survey. Along with Nigerian investigators, we spoke with Tongo villagers and collected evidence in a 5-square-mile area surrounding the attack site. We were accompanied by a Nigerian survivor of the attack and the commander of the Nigerian response forces, who walked us step by step through the events of the attack. The site survey was critical to our investigation. We found the ambush site and the surrounding areas to have been largely undisturbed. We collected physical evidence from the site of the attack and locations from where each of our heroes fell. And we submitted this evidence for forensic analysis. No single survivor of the attack that we interviewed had a complete picture of the events of the 3rd and 4th of October. It took a tremendous volume of evidence to corroborate the accounts and to establish the facts. The report and its exhibits contain more than 6,300 pages of evidence. As a result, I can say with confidence that no one has a better grasp on what happened in Tongo than the members of my team. But in spite of our efforts, there's limits to what we have learned. There are things about the 4th of October that I will never be able to effectively convey to you in words. My description of the events today will not do justice to the bravery of the men involved. It will likely not fully capture the intensity of the enemy attack or the conditions under which these men made split-second decisions. Finally, I cannot overstate the courage with which our forces fought on the 4th of October.
I would just ask that we keep our questions. We want to have as many people as possible get to ask questions. So I'll give you a follow-up, but if you could keep them concise. Lita.
Hi, Lolita Baldor with the Associated Press. General Cloutier, to you, can you tell us, there's a lot of talk about and confusion about the mission that was sent up versus the mission that they actually went on initially. If they had submitted an accurate picture of the mission that they were going to go after, would they have been equipped, manned, or supported in any differently, in any greater level than they were with the mission that they sent to go to do a key leader engagement? Or would there have been more ISR, something like that? And then just a follow-up to General Waldhauser. You said you take responsibility. Can you just tell us sort of broadly what you think you could have done better to either prevent or address some of the problems that were found? And what have you done broadly on African operations? Have you scaled them back? Have you limited any authority of commanders? Have you done anything specifically that affect operations in Africa as a whole as a result of this?
So I'll go first,
yes, sir.
If you don't mind. So on the issue of what could we have done different, what could we have done better, I think from the combatant commander perspective, and I try to make this in my open remarks, the whole concept of by, with, and through is a strategy that needs to get down to the lowest level in the chain of command. Our forces are there to help build partner capacity. Our forces are there to help partner nations be able to take care of their own security as appropriate. As indicated in Robert's comments, I mean, Niger is one of the poorest countries in the nation, in the African continent. They're surrounded by ISIS, AQIM, Boko Haram. They have some significant security challenges, so we're there at their request. So the point of the by, with, and through strategy is that the tactical operations are conducted by the partner force, not by our U.S. forces. Our authorities are there that keep us out of direct combat. So it's important that gets reemphasized. That's one of the things we've done from the COCOM level. The second part of that, Lita, was?
The broader operations in Africa, did you scale them? Have you scaled them back? Have you put any restrictions, that sort of thing on them?
So the way would like to characterize that is what we've done is we are now far more prudent in our missions. The missions that we actually accompany on have to have some type of strategic value in terms of the enemy we're going against. Do they have a strategic threat to the United States? We have increased, which I won't go into details here, but we've increased the firepower, we've increased the ISR capacity, we've increased various response times. And what this has done is it has allowed these teams perhaps to not to do the tempo that they would like, but it provides adequate and more resourceful force protection measures in order to still keep up with the enemy forces on the ground. So we have beefed up a lot of things posture-wise with regard to these forces.
Had the first mission been properly characterized, it would have been required to be approved at a higher level. And by being approved at a higher level, it would have received more oversight from the chain of command. And that higher level chain of command would have decided what resources were required to support the mission.
Right, but would it have been, since, just based on General Walthauser's comments, with the by, with, and through emphasis, would it have even been approved?
I'd be speculating on what decision the higher level commander would have made, but it would have gone to his level and he would have provided that oversight.
General Walthauser, when you look at this report, you read contradicting and ambiguous operational process, approval process, lack of attention to detail, quality control, lack of situation awareness, planning problems, training problems across the board with the special operators in Africa. So in layman's terms, how would you characterize this? Are they sloppy? Are they cowboys? Are they taking too much risk? What would you tell the American people about this?
So let me take the training issue first. The training issue really becomes a manning and staffing issue back at home station. The training program that all the SOF teams use is adequate, it's appropriate, it prepares them for what they need to do when they not only deploy to AFRICOM, but other AORs around the globe. The key issue, I think, with regards to training is the manning piece. If you don't have the people there at the appropriate time to conduct the training, if they come late, if the leader in this case comes late, it impacts the ability to develop cohesion, it impacts the ability to have a team that's been formed well before they go forward. With regards to what happened in country, the issue becomes the time spent to integrate and work with the partner force. There are all kind of significant challenges, not the least of which is simply things like language. So if you get to a position in an operation where you're under enemy contact, you need to be able to operate like clockwork without having to speak because you know the drills. And in this particular case, the team did not conduct those basic soldier level skills that are really necessary to go on an operation such as this.
But again, how would you characterize the special operators? I mean, you said there was problems all the way up the chain. Are they sloppy? Are they? How would you characterize them?
So in this particular case, what the investigation shows is that the CONOPS, for example, that was.
I'm talking about in general with
Right.
special operators in Africa. How would you characterize their behavior?
I think that generally, from my observations and the evidence that this investigation found, is that special operators are doing a fantastic job across the continent. They work under some extreme conditions. In the African continent, they have to be able to make decisions about whether to or not to take to go into certain operations, because if the assets that they need are not there today, they need to be able to come back tomorrow when they have them. So the bottom line is the special operators on the continent are serving well. They do high-risk missions, and based on my observations, this particular team is not indicative of what they do.
But again, you say lack of
Barbara?
questions.
Barbara.
General Cloutier and General Walthauser, a couple of specific questions. Noting none of us have actually seen the report, and you said very little about precisely what happened here. Let me ask a couple of very specific questions, if I may. First, is it accurate that they filed a false report saying that they were going to go after a high-value target and that they were not authorized to do that mission? Can you explain that? My second question is, can you tell us how long, once the battle broke out, specifically, how long it took to get medevac and QRF rescue forces to the Americans, and why did it take so long? What was that time frame? And my last question is, fundamentally, I do not understand something here. You have described that you now are adding additional equipment, weapons, firepower, vehicles, rechecking training. How do you put a team out there that doesn't have that. It's 2017. You know you're in an area. This is not a regrettable instance. This is an instance where you already know you're in an area where terrorists operate. Otherwise, you wouldn't be there. How is it that you have put a team out there that doesn't already have the necessary firepower, weapons, and vehicles that you're now going to give them? If you could answer those three questions.
Well, let me take the last one first, and then Jean Cloutier can provide the details on the timelines that you requested. I think it's important to understand contextually that there have been many there's been enemy activity in the northern Nigerian Mali border area. This was known to all concerned. The special operations component had done an assessment for armored vehicles, for example, and determined a while back that they weren't necessary, primarily based on the fact of trafficability, roads, weather, and the like, and the fact that the partner forces there had the vehicles that they did. That's one of the things that this investigation brought out, and we immediately directed that armored vehicles be given to those teams as an option. They should have the choice, because if the situation is such that the roads and trafficability could handle armored vehicles, then they should have that option. So that's an example of trying to learn from this, trying to put into practice some of the things that we learned.
And then I do have a follow-up.
The first American aircraft arrived on scene 1 hour and 31 minutes after the first report of enemy contact.
Sir, is that medevac or QRF?
No, that is a U.S. ISR platform. That was the first aircraft to arrive on station. Nigerian ground QRFs arrived just under 4 hours after the initial call of enemy contact. And then the medevac aircraft that eventually withdrew the team arrived approximately 5 hours and 43 minutes after the initial contact began.
So I think it's important, if I could, to underscore here at this point that part of the thought process of the commanders who had the authority to make the decisions to eventually send this team on this mission, they had oversight, ISR, over this site for over 6 hours. And in that 6 hour period, they determined that the site was cold. There was nobody there.
Not where the battlefield took place.
Correct. The battle took place on the way back, 20 miles or so from.
So you did not have ISR on the battlefield site, and it took you 5 to 6 or whatever hours.
As Jean Cloutier would say, or will tell you, the ISR then once the team went through the objective at Tongo Tongo, the ISR was overhead. The decision on the ground was made to send that ISR platform north to observe crossing points on the Mali border. So after the mission was complete, there was ISR available. It was sent north.
Why did you think it was appropriate for AFRICOM to investigate itself and not turn this over to independent military investigation?
So I'll take that. I mean, obviously, as the combatant commander, I have responsibility for what goes on in the AFRICOM AOR. And as a consequence, I felt that it was my obligation to go ahead and do this. I'm well aware of the optics, but if you compare it, that's why I talk a little bit about the components. So we have a 2-star led Special Operations Component Commander who runs operations of Special Operations Force on the continent. So we essentially, it'd be like a division going to investigate a regiment or a battalion. So knowing that, General Cloutier, and I think if given the opportunity today to show you what he's learned and so forth, I think it'll underscore that he in fact did a transparent investigation, that he got all the facts, and I'm very confident that his job was done thoroughly and without any type of prejudice. So I don't view it I don't view it as AFRICOM inspecting itself or investigating itself. It's my responsibility as a commander to do so. And in the early stages when we discussed this was determined to be the appropriate way to go.
Gentlemen, thanks for your time. Dan Lamothe with the Washington Post. A couple questions on transparency. At this point, we're 8 months out or so from this. We have 8 pages and 8 pages alone. I know there's a longer report. I know there are 6,000 pages that probably need to be declassified and worked through. Can you provide us any timeline on when that might occur? And furthermore, we have a video that's been released by the Pentagon today. It's significantly shorter than what was shown to Congress earlier this week when speaking with Congress members. Why was that video shortened, and will that be released as well?
Well, I'll take the first one on with regards to when the investigation will be finally released. Actually, I'm not quite sure. I mean, we could have waited until that was all redacted, which is a very laborious process, line by line for 6,000 pages. We've hired additional help to help us complete that at AFRICOM. But what we want, but instead of delaying, what we wanted to do was get the information to the families after this amount of time. General Cloutier's investigation was about 3 months. The review process took the time that it did because it's complex. And the chairman and the secretary, to get their arms around it, needed to have time to just process all the information. So we wanted, we wanted to get the information to the families. We're working to get the investigation redacted, and I can't tell you today exactly when that will be.
Yeah, I'm going to have a follow-up for General Cloutier, but first, General Waldhauser, I'm a little bit confused here. You've said at several points you're accepting responsibility. At the same time, we have these two lower-level captains, 03s, that made the decision to file false paperwork. Who's to blame? Is it the lower-level captains, or is it the overall culture within AFRICOM that allowed this to happen?
Well, let me try to explain it this way. As a combatant commander, I have certain roles and responsibilities from the strategic perspective, and I'm responsible for all U.S. military operations on the continent. That said, we have component commanders then who is in their charge, Special Operations Command Africa in this particular instance. It's his responsibility, his job to conduct, oversee the special operations all over the continent. Moreover, we also have in this particular case, you have the Army, the service provider who trains, organizes, and equips. They have a role in this. And you have Special Operations Command out of Tampa who also has a role in this as well. So I have responsibilities as a combatant commander. The service has responsibilities. The other COCOM in this case has responsibilities. So that's how it works.
You're describing a pretty diffuse set of responsibilities. Will anyone be held accountable?
The Secretary was very clear, and as I try to make in my opening remarks, the Secretary is very clear as designating the Army and SOCOM to take all specific means within the law and regulations to identify and ensure appropriate accountability takes place. And that includes anything that may not have been addressed in the investigation. So the accountability itself squarely rests on the shoulders of the Army and United States Special Operations Command as directed by the Secretary.
And General Cloutier, just to follow on the timeline, the three different missions that are described, could you walk us through when those happen and when those change? For example, when did they go from the first mission, whether it was key leader engagement or the killer capture, when did that get shifted to the backup QRF and then ultimately then to the third mission, which was site exploitation?
Right, so the first mission begins at approximately 05:59 hours on the morning of the third. They complete that mission at approximately 1400 on the afternoon of the third. As they are traveling back to base, that first mission is complete. They receive a change of mission at approximately 1800. From there, they begin moving north on their second mission to serve as a QRF, and then they receive a change of mission at about 01 on the morning of the 4th.
In that 5:59, that initial mission, what are they going out to do? Are they going out to do killer capture, or are they going out to do key leader engagement?
So that first mission was the one that was not properly characterized. It was characterized as a civil military reconnaissance when it was actually focused on the ISIS-GS sub-commander.
Just one clarification. Clearly the mischaracterization was wrong, but can you draw a direct and definitive link between that and the ambush that happened the next day?
No, so the first mission that was not properly characterized, the unit executes, completes, and that mission is over and done despite not properly being characterized. They are returning back to base. That mission does not result in the attack in Tongo Tongo.
Right. Have you been able to figure out why it took them an hour to call or to relay that they had come under attack?
Yeah, so the evidence would indicate that up until that point, they believed it was a small enemy force that they could handle. And then at that point, when they made the final radio transmission, they realized that it was a much larger force.
Secretary Karam, General Waldhauser, I wonder if you could tell us how, driving forward, we're told to expect a lot more of these kind of missions across the MENA. It's a very large area. How much is this incident an indication of any lack of resources or attention that's needed? You mentioned a lot of changes, including training and force protection, but do you have enough to do what's being asked of you across such a large area in the future? And is a policy in place that either prevents future incidents like this or connects to the rest of government for the ultimate goal of these missions, which is supposed to be greater security?
Do you want to start with
So first of all, I would just say that our intention, our guidance remains the same in this part of the continent of Africa, is to maintain our relationship and continue to support the French, for example, in their lead in this particular area, in the Mali-Niger area. So the mission is essentially African-led, French-assisted, and U.S.-supported. Asset-wise, I mean, if you look at the threats there, the reason we're in Niger to begin with is to prevent something from happening, to prevent some of these violent extremist organizations from taking over the ungoverned spaces where they could eventually perhaps cause all kind of problems for the Niger, the region, Europe, and potentially the United States. So we're there in a preventive way to help those partner forces be able to take care of their own security. So the assets that we have there now, we don't anticipate any additional forces, for example, and it's our role to continue to work with our partners, especially in this case the French, to keep them in the lead as they conduct their operations there as well.
With respect to the policy side of it, I mean, I think the report reaffirms in many ways the value of a by, with, and through approach. And I think the Secretary and the Chairman are constantly reviewing with respect to the requirements and assets, the global distribution of forces to ensure that it's aligned not just with our national defense security priorities and alert to the rising challenges posed by competition with Russia and China, but also to emerging threats like North Korea, in addition to the threat that violent extremist organizations pose. So they're constantly reviewing the global distribution of assets. But I think that the Secretary very much believes that whether it's in the Middle East or in Africa, an approach that is focused on enabling the capabilities of local partners and working in concert with other allies and partners who have as much, if not more, of a stake in this than we do, is the right approach.
Do you mean within the forces you already have, or forces going forward? I mean, we hear already, commanders complaining of not having enough ISR or enough bases, much less the potential numbers of special operators needed to do the policy mission that's been asked of the force.
We don't anticipate any significant change in the assets that were provided. I think that, as I tried to indicate earlier, the mindset in terms of direct combat operations conducted by the partner force, and if there are occasions where we would accompany, then if the resources aren't available, or if the team does not believe, or if the leadership within the chain of command who has the approval authorities on these, if they don't have what they need to come back the next day, when and if they have the assets they need.
Hi, Louis Martinez with ABC News. If I could just go back to the point that you're all stressing by, with, and through, which implies a support mission. If there is a killer capture mission for a high-value target, which appears to have been the case here at multiple levels, not only just the captains who approved the first mission, but also the battalion commander who approved the second mission, if I'm correct. Are those proper authorities for U.S. troops to advise and assist on kill or capture missions, or would they not be allowed to do so under the by, with, and through? And then I just have a clarification for both of you.
So let me try to explain the structure of the by, with, and through, and the direct action or direct combat mission, as you referred to. Once again, that direct combat or capture kill, as you describe, will be conducted by the partner force, not by U.S. forces. And so U.S. forces are not to be involved in direct combat. So these missions are put together. The missions are drawn up so that U.S. forces are not in direct combat. So in other words, if there was a target to go to, our U.S. forces don't go to that target. They stay behind. It's a little bit of an art, not necessarily a science. You can't really say you got to stay back 500 yards. You can only go this close. But once you're on the ground, the individuals know for certain they are not to participate in whatever direct combat mission on a target that would take place. So these missions are designed to be conducted by the partner force. U.S. forces not involved in direct combat. We're there in a support and advisory mode.
So in this case, the first mission, it appears that the officers took it upon themselves to lead the mission. Am I correct in that? And also in the second mission, the second team apparently was also going to be the lead in that mission. Can you verify that as well?
So
go ahead.
So on the second mission, it involved two teams. One team that was flying in on helicopters from another location was the main effort or the primary force, and Team Wallam was the secondary force or the supporting force.
So were the advisors to be the primary, or were they advisors in that context?
The advisors were never intended to be the primary individuals to conduct the capture kill.
Correct, but does that mean that they believe that they were the primary?
No, no. In fact, the mission, as it eventually turned out, which when Team Wallam was given their third mission, at that point in time, as we indicated earlier, there had been ISR over that campsite for hours, 5 to 6 hours at least. No one was there. So the mission was a sensitive site, a sensitive site for intelligence. And I think it's important to underscore why then was that mission undertaken? Why was it so important to send those people up there? And I think there's really two reasons that I think are important to understand for context. And the first one is that particular individual they were after has notorious connections to all kind of various violent extremist groups in the Mali, Niger area. So there would be perhaps some intelligence that would help in that regard. And then moreover, we've had an American citizen by the name of Jeffrey Woodkey who has been captured and held hostage somewhere in that area for the last year and a half. And there was a possibility that this individual would, and what they might find at that target would be a piece of the puzzle of the whole government approach to try to return an American who's been held hostage for over a year and a half. Now, in that particular mission, the individuals who were going to sweep through that site with no enemy were the Nigerian forces. It was not U.S. forces who would lead through that. So that mission, once again, and that was rehearsed at their last position before they went the last 5 or 10 miles. Roger can give the specific details, but they practiced their movement across the objective and how that would take place. But that again was to be conducted by the partner force, not U.S. forces. Anything you wanted to add to that?
No, that's correct, sir.
Gentlemen, Thomas Gibbons, New York Times. That's for General Cloutier, General Waldhauser. I'm a little confused on this first concept of operations. In the 8-page executive summary, you give just about as many lines to them, the 3212 putting on their personal protective equipment, as you do to the first concept of operations. And one thing that remains completely unclear is what type of mission that you've decided that it went from a recon mission to now a counter-terror mission against a named target. Like you said, General Waldhauser was very significant in the region, and how that amount of intelligence about one target made 2 captains decide to go after him or get in the general area or find him when, right, so you're saying that those 2 captains were the only ones who knew about this piece of intelligence that had them go to this part of the country to look for him, and then somehow in the midst of all that you had ISR find him in a different area, and now a lieutenant colonel was involved in Chad. Can you just clarify why we're dealing with that?
So again, the first mission was not properly characterized. In the concept of operation, it was characterized as a civil military reconnaissance. That CONOP was put together at the team level and submitted to the AOB or the company level, where it was approved incorrectly by that acting AOB commander.
Lieutenant Colonel Painter would have to have signed off on that as well.
Had it been properly characterized.
But he had no knowledge that first operation was taking place. He had no knowledge that the team was IDO to lower.
He thought it was a civil military reconnaissance.
Right, but you also had ISR looking for this, and I understand that ISR is pretty much a strategic level asset. So how do you put ISR, IVO Taloa if it's just up there on a civil military reconnaissance?
The ISR was controlled by the AOB at that time, and it was put over Taloa. And then after that first mission is complete and they're returning back to their base, it's directed by the AOB further north to continue to look.
How did that
AOB is
team,
company level.
Team 3212 know to go into that location where this target was?
General Cloutier, can you explain in layman's terms what were the key mistakes that were made from your point of view? What did they do wrong after your investigation? And General Waldhauser, have you or will you recommend punishment for those involved in these mistakes? And are you recommending that those who died be considered for Valor Awards?
Well, I think the first point is that all of our soldiers fought valiantly that day. And there were a series of contributing factors to what occurred in Tongo, but none of those contributing factors are the direct cause of the enemy attack in Tongo. The direct cause of the enemy attack in Tongo is that the enemy achieved tactical surprise there, and our forces were outnumbered approximately 3 to 1. So there's a series of findings that we have identified from pre-deployment training through the relief in place, the transfer between the outgoing team and the incoming team, some basic soldier skills and requirements that they should have executed, as was previously addressed by General Walthauser. There was the concept of operation that was not properly characterized, and then there were some processes at all levels of the chain of command that need to be improved.
When you say mischaracterize the plan, did they basically lie about what they were doing?
That's not what the evidence indicates. It indicates that's not what it indicates.
General Walthauser?
With regards to the punishment, so it's very clear the Secretary's direction that SOCOM will eventually, well now, have the responsibility for taking appropriate action to ensure accountability. In the investigation 23 findings, there are, I think, 3 findings that call out certain individuals for activities, the CONOP piece, for example, that is clearly unacceptable. The recommendation by the investigating officer, by General Cloutier, is to SOCOM for appropriate action, and that's the appropriate response. I mean, we don't recommend punishment, we recommend appropriate action. So there are 3 cases in there that will be dealt with by SOCOM. Then moreover, following on to that, SOCOM has been tasked that anything that's not in the investigation identified in that regard, that they should take a look at that as well. So these chain of command issues, with regard to oversight, for example, for some of the integration training with a partner force that didn't take place, I'm sure this is something that will be looked at very closely because that has to be taken very, very seriously. Now, with regards to the awards, I think it's important to answer that, is that the short answer is yes, there will be awards. And one of the reasons it's taken a while is because we didn't get involved in the award process while the investigation was ongoing, because that would have led it crossways with information and the like. So the chain of command from the unit up through, I believe it's going to go through the through SOCOM. SOCOM will be the final adjudicating authority, but there will be awards for valor in this case.
Which awards are you recommending?
At the moment, we at AFRICOM don't recommend the award. If we're in the approval process, we will. But at the moment, to be quite honest, I'm not sure if we're in the process, because we're going to use the same chain, if you will, that CENTCOM uses, what we're going to use, and whether or not we get a chop on that is to be determined.
So just a point of clarification, General Cloutier. So you did not recommend that disciplinary action be taken against these 3 individuals. You just recommend that the facts be looked at and the action that's warranted be taken. Is that correct?
So my job was to determine all of the facts, and then I recommended that appropriate action be taken as decided by those chains of command.
And also, there's a reference in the report to a delay in the recovery effort for Staff Sergeant Johnson because of a belief that he might have been held hostage in a nearby village. What happened there? Tell us more about that. What's the nature of this report, and how much did it delay the recovery effort?
So the search for Sergeant David Johnson began immediately, as it did with our first 3 fallen heroes. There was some reporting that indicated there could be a soldier held hostage somewhere north of Tongo Tongo. Of course, that report was taken seriously, and assets began looking there for signs of life or anything like that. It turned out to be an errant report, but the search for Sergeant David Johnson never stopped. He ran 960 meters. He ran a long way from where he was last seen, and he made his last stand where he fought to the end under a dense thorny tree. Took a long time to find him.
There is a reference in the report to a delay in perhaps recovery of the remains. I'm not sure exactly what the delay was, but are you saying that there was not a delay in searching for Staff Sergeant Johnson?
The search for Sergeant Johnson never stopped. It was continuous. It involved ISR assets, numerous ground forces that were looking for him. The report of the soldier being held hostage, other forces began looking in that direction, but it was never stopped.
Yes, Generals, if you could talk a little more about what exactly these 2 captains mischaracterized in the CONOP. I mean, is it the title of the CONOP? Is it the content inside of it? Is it something like a level 0 CONOP being described as a level 1 CONOP? I mean, what did they mischaracterize exactly, and how did that slip through?
So the CONOP for the mission that they undertook on the 3rd, the paperwork that was submitted, the packet was identical to a previous CONOP. So it was done hastily, and there was a lack of attention to detail.
And if I could do a follow-up on that, what, why did they do that? I mean, what did you ascertain any motives as to why they filed this false or sloppy con-op?
It wasn't a deliberate intent to deceive. It was lack of attention to detail.
That was my question.
Jeff. Thank you. General Waldhauser, Jeff Schogel with Task and Purpose. Will any commanders in a supervisory role who are part of the chain of command face disciplinary or administrative action for leadership failures that contributed to this incident?
That will be up to SOCOM to decide. And again, in the report, there were 3 or so specific findings, as General Cloutier just described, that discuss about appropriate action, inappropriate for us at this point in time to say specific punishments. But again, the chain of command responsibilities will be looked at with the agency the Secretary designated, which is SOCOM, to do that.
And one quick follow-up: do you believe any of the U.S. service members who fought in this incident deserve to be recommended for the Medal of Honor?
I don't have that level of detail at this point in time, and that will come up from the process.
So my finding indicates that there were numerous acts of extraordinary bravery that occurred on that day, and they should be adjudicated as SOCOM deems necessary. There were acts of bravery.
Sirs, good afternoon. I'm Tom Squitieri with Talk Media News. You mentioned U.S. forces and that Nigerian forces were outnumbered 3-1. Is this the largest force U.S. troops have faced in country?
The short answer is yes, and that's that's the tactical surprise that we talk about. And part of the thought process of the commanders who approved this mission, yes, it was a dangerous area. Yes, they knew the activities went on there, but they had never seen anything in this magnitude: numbers, mobility, and training. It was a total tactical surprise, and how how that took place.
Hi, thanks. Tom Watkins, AFP. Can you just talk a little bit more about the French involvement? How many Mirages were there? How low did they fly? And why they didn't engage the enemy?
So there were 2 French Mirage aircraft. First of all, the French response played a significant role in our soldiers surviving. 2 French Mirages responded. They conducted 4 shows of force, and they put their aircraft right at treetop level, and they were instrumental in driving the enemy forces away. The situation on the ground was unclear. There were communications issues, so their ability to communicate with the team on the ground, to know exactly where U.S. soldiers and Nigerian soldiers were versus the villagers of Tongo, made the situation on the ground unclear, and so they couldn't clearly identify targets, so they didn't engage.
The pilot couldn't speak to the ground forces?
They could not.
General Waldhauser, Phoenix Huang with Hong Kong Phoenix TV. I have a question other than the Niger ambush, which is there were 2 U.S. airmen was minor injured in Djibouti last week, and China has already declined, which was, quote, the accusations on China was completely inconsistent with the facts. Have you talked with any Chinese officials recently about this?
The demarches and such were handled through the State Department. I've talked to some military officials in Djibouti, but the State Department has handled that.
Tell us something, the evidence about the incidents going on over there.
Other than the fact that it's happened several times, and it's certainly very, very dangerous for the pilots to fly in there in that regard, and we're very concerned about it, obviously.
You're confident that it was the Chinese who was
involved? We're confident of the locations that took place.
Eric Schmidt from the New York Times. Sirs, thank you for doing this. Just to help unpack a little bit of this timetable and the second and third activities they're involved in, General Cloutier, you said at 1800 on 3 October is when they got the second mission. Presumably this is when they've gotten the new intelligence where Shefu is, and the team is launched from our lead. The 3212 is now in the backup role. But you've also talked about the ISR soak over this area at some point determines the campsite is cold. When is that determined, and how does that relate to then the subsequent remissioning at 0100 on 4 October when it's just turned into a site exploitation? And then I have a follow-up.
So Team Wallam arrives at their QRF, their Quick Reaction Force location, at approximately 2300 hours. Team Arlet is en route on aircraft at that time. and that's when the weather turns bad and they're forced to abort. So they get the new mission at approximately 01. So during that 2-hour period, ISR is still over that objective area. And in that 6 hours of continuous ISR, they observe no enemy activity. So they receive the change of mission at approximately 01 or 1 in the morning, and then they begin moving north to clear what we have called objective north.
What is it determined the campsite is? Shafu is in the wind. He's gone.
When they receive the new mission, that's when the battalion commander makes the decision to send them north.
But I think you're referring to no activity at the site is what, no activity.
2300?
At 2300, Team Arlet has to abort the mission and return to base. And then between 2300 and 01 the next morning, there's continuous ISR, and that's when the battalion commander makes the determination that there's no enemy there, and they can move forward and clear the mission or clear the objective.
So by the time they establish their position as the QRF, they're waiting for the assault force to come. They're still under the belief that Shafu may be in that area. There's
no, sir. There was no indications that the enemy was there, even though Team Arlet was going to fly in.
And then second, just to follow, if I can, we talk.
Thank you. Hi, Courtney Cubey from NBC News. A couple questions. I know you don't want to speculate on prior paperwork or the paperwork, you know, if it would have been approved if they had actually filled it out saying that it was going after a key leader as opposed to a recon mission, but had prior missions like that been approved for this unit? Was there a history of them going on these kinds of missions where they were actually looking for an individual?
This particular team Olalam, no. To my knowledge, I'd have to check that, but to my knowledge, they had just been in the country for about a month. They had done 2 previous key leader engagements, which is, as General Cloutier explained, kind of where that CONOP came from. But this was their 3rd mission, and consequently, the first of this nature.
It's fair to say that prior missions to go after a key leader had never been approved or had just never been submitted? I'm sorry, not a key leader to go after a HVT had never been submitted or approved.
The current team had not done a mission like this. The previous team had done missions like that.
And then if I could ask you, there have been reports that, I know that it specifically lays out that they were never captured alive, any of the individuals who were killed, but do you have any indications that they were actually in the hands of ISIS at any point, or there was an attempt by ISIS to remove any of the remains?
Yeah, the evidence is pretty clear that, our fallen heroes were stripped of any serviceable equipment, and 3 of our servicemen, 2 were found in the back of an enemy vehicle and 1 beside it. So they were driven off by French aircraft, and so the evidence indicates that there was an intent to take them with them.
Is there any video of that or anything that you have, or is that just all based on the French Mirage?
That's based on the forensics from the Nigerian ground QRFs that arrived and found them in that way.
Okay, so we're going to do this really quickly. So Jack?
Generals, thanks very much. Question about the ISR. You talked about how the ISR was over the campsite. It was determined it was cold. But at any point, was the ISR monitoring the route that the team was going to take as they headed back? And if so, if not, why not? Is that something that's been changed where the routes are monitored more closely now, given that you had this campsite where you thought you had Shafu and then they left? They could have been elsewhere in the area.
So as the team completes its mission on the area we define in the report as Objective North, that's the area just south of the Mali border, they're complete with their mission at about 8:30 in the morning. And as they get ready to depart to return back to their base, the team commander directs the ISR that he has overhead to return to the border area to look for crossing points, areas where the enemy is crossing back and forth over the border. So ISR was over him. It's directed to move north to the border.
Thank you. I have a couple clarifying questions, please. You said that 3 were found near a vehicle, that their remains were found, suggesting that there was an attempt by enemy forces to take control of their bodies. Is that then fair to say that Sergeant David Johnson was never in enemy hands and his remains were never in enemy hands? And also,
go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sorry, and also Dan had asked earlier about a video that had been produced to sort of spell out what happened, and that the one presented to the Hill was, I believe, 22 minutes long, and the one that has been presented to us was 10 minutes long. Given that you've talked a lot about transparency, can you help us understand why that video was cut by half?
Let me just, if I can, I'll take the video question first. The video that was shown to Congress is 21 minutes in length. It's extremely detailed, goes into a lot of specific activities right there on the ground. I think the thought process was that today would have been, I don't know, too much information and maybe not, in other words, more time to take questions.
Can we get it anyhow? We'd like to.
We'll review. Corey?
I'm sorry, my question wasn't answered?
Her first question. So Sergeant David Johnson, first of all, died actively engaging the enemy. He was never captured alive. His hands were never bound. His body was treated like all the other remains, both U.S. and Nigerian. His serviceable equipment was stripped and taken from him. But he was never in enemy hands alive. They did have access to his remains and took his equipment.
In the same spot that he died in, essentially.
Absolutely.
Clarifying question.
I'm trying to get to as many people as I can. Corey.
Thanks. General Waldhauser, Corey Dixon, Can you talk about the current state of this group of ISIS-GS? Have U.S. or Nigerian forces engaged with them since? And you know, what changes? Well, you've talked about the changes, but have you targeted this group at all in Niger since?
Well, ISIS-GS is one of the many violent extremist groups in that particular region of the Mali-Niger border. They change allegiances quite frequently because there's underpinnings to AQIM and a group called JNIM, Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam al-Muslim. So they change allegiances out of convenience all the time. I think it's noteworthy to point out that they did not take responsibility for this until sometime, I believe, in January. We did not know exactly what the name of the group was, but I think you can check this, that in January, I think towards the end, they took responsibility. I would just say that it would be inappropriate for me to talk about operations ongoing with that particular group, but be assured that working with our partners in that area, we are following that group.
Last question, Tara.
Thank you. Tara Kopp, Military Times. General Waldhauser, this is actually kind of a follow on Corey's question. Have there been any HVT missions approved since then that have been executed successfully? And then also, there were reports in the last couple of weeks that Chefu had actually been potentially killed or captured. Can you comment on those reports?
So two things on the Chefu's capture or being in jail or captured or killed in other places. Look, in this part of Africa, myths and lies are notorious, and once those were checked out, there were two separate occasions that I'm aware of where the Nigerian authorities thought they may have had him, but upon further scrutiny, it was determined it was not him. As far as other HVT operations inside Niger, none have taken place since this particular time.
So none have been approved?
None have been approved because none have taken place in Niger since that time.
General, one quick follow-up. You said there's no American combat role here.
Direct combat.
Clearly, in this case, they were in combat.
Well, as a result of collective self-defense.
And I understand there have been troops in contact before. How often does that happen, in your experience in Africa?
So,
how many times do Americans come in contact?
In the last year, approximately 10 times. And the majority of those are in Somalia, where we have active operations ongoing there. And a tick could be, something as simple as a small arms fire from a long distance away. But these missions where we accompany partner forces to objectives are designed so that enemy contact is not likely for our forces. But ticks have happened in the past. They get reported. Yeah.
What about in Niger?
In Niger, I think the December tick that happened was a result of it's a different type of operation in that part of Niger. That's by DIFA, which is by the Lake Chad Basin area, with Boko Haram, another one of the threats that threatens the entire border of the country of Niger. At this particular occasion, it was we were partnering with a force that was much larger. It was battalion size, as I recall. And at that point in time, there for that particular tick, French aircraft, Nigerian aircraft, artillery by the partnered force was all used. So these groups, our partner forces are in areas where dangerous. But in that particular case in December, you can see that it was a different context in terms of Boko Haram, their activities there, and the size of the force that was being partnered with.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. No, I'm happy. We're happy to take more questions.
FEMA, the Army Corps of Engineers, the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Also want to thank all of the contractors who've worked so hard on this effort, and all of our residents, both those who have lost their homes and those who haven't, who have been with us in supporting this effort for the last 7 months. This job is not fully complete. No job this big with this many moving parts is going to be perfect and without problems. We know that there are issues out there with some residents who have not had their property cleaned as they had expected. And we know that we're not going to be able to make everyone happy. What we want to do is get as close to that perfection as we possibly can. And that's the pledge that I will give today from myself and the organization that I represent, the City of Santa Rosa, that we're going to work as hard as we can till we get as close to perfection as we can on this debris cleanup. With that, I'll introduce Supervisor Shirley Zane of the County of Sonoma.
Thank you, Mayor. I am Shirley Zane. I represent the 3rd District on the Board of Supervisors, and last year I was the chair of the board during the fires. And I want to start off by saying that disasters begin and end at the local level. We've been here all along with our residents, and we're going to continue to be there with them. There's still a very long road ahead. We want to celebrate what we've been able to achieve, but we also want to assure the people that we serve that we will continue to advocate for them, that we will be there for them. We had a town hall meeting the other night with the county and the city, and we had about 160 residents who showed up. And they, listening to all the speakers, when we got to the therapist who talked about the crisis counseling program that we were rolling out at the county, a $3 million FEMA-funded program that will be funded through December. A lot of the people resonated with that the most because the therapist said, are you drinking water? Are you eating? Are you sleeping? And most importantly, are you getting the support you need? Are you talking to your neighbors? She stressed the importance of not being isolated. And so when we come here together to do basically a press conference, we're also talking about standing shoulder to shoulder with all of our different resources. And on behalf of the County of Sonoma, I wanna thank the City of Santa Rosa. I wanna thank Karolyis. I want to thank the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and their contractors, our incredible representatives back in Washington, Congressman Huffman and Congressman Thompson, who are working tirelessly to bring us back the millions, billions of dollars we need to rebuild our community. We do have a long road ahead of us, but we have completed major advances in the debris removal. Sonoma County has worked tirelessly to reach this goal. We've had over 40 community meetings in 4 weeks following the fires. And we continued with our partners. We hosted a right of entry processing center. I would be remiss not to mention our environmental health staff that processed literally over 3,000 applications for the government-run debris program. The county also participated in a joint debris task force, which has been instrumental in determining the process of debris removal. It's been a complex process. There have been a lot of players, but we've come together and we aren't done yet. That's the main thing. We aren't done yet. Everybody that stands here before you today has massive empathy over what our residents are experiencing, not just now, not 7 months ago, but what they will be experiencing for the next 7 years. We embrace them, we are here for them, and I promise you, we can't do enough for them. So even though we're talking about debris removal, it is, as the mayor said, about rebuilding people's lives. We've given many of them a clean slate in terms of those properties and those foundations upon which they can build. And not only build new structures of which will house them and their families, but rebuild memories, the type of memories that we all need as we move forward as a community. Thank you very much, and I'd like to introduce now the incredible Director of the Operations of Emergency Services for the Governor, Director Mark Ghirlandaci, and we can't thank him enough for all he's done.
Thank you, Supervisor Zhang, and good morning. I'm Mark Ghirlandaci, Governor Brown's Director of Emergency Services. I think I want to start off by saying that from the beginning of this very catastrophic, very devastating event, the response has been a one team, one fight effort. That's local, state, federal, private sector, the business community, and mostly the community, the citizens of all the counties that have been impacted by the fire coming together in the response to this event. And that's carried through the recovery, a whole of community approach through the response and into the recovery. And we're continuing to work that today. This is a marathon, not a sprint. But you all may remember just roughly 7 months ago in town hall meetings where I stated that we were going to aggressively pursue a debris cleanup operation in what was the largest debris operation since the 1906 earthquake that California has had to deal with, and really one of the most complicated debris operations that we've seen in our country. And the challenge was getting it done very, very fast in a time frame that we could accelerate the recovery process to move forward. That took a tremendous amount of coordination, and we could not have done that alone. This had to be a whole of community approach. I can't say enough about the local governments, our federal partners, the state agencies, and the citizens who endured trucks and heavy equipment and noise and a disruption in the time frame that they were dealing with the outcomes of the disaster. We are now close to 99% complete of major operations, but we know that there are still properties that need to be addressed. There's a handful of properties. We're not going anywhere. We'll continue to work those properties, those sites, and we'll continue to stay engaged until it's done in an appropriate manner. And we'll take into account all of the issues that are applicable that we can address with our partners at the federal government to make sure that it's done in the best way possible. This is a tremendous effort, and moving forward, after the debris has been cleaned up, we're going to still continue to remain here through the process of helping our communities rebuild, making sure that every federal dollar that's available, making sure that state programs and dollars that are available, making sure that we leverage non-governmental organizations and community-based organizations to come together to ensure that our communities get rebuilt to the fullest. This is very important that you know this, because this is a one team, one fight effort, and will continue to be as we move forward. I can't say enough about the city of Santa Rosa, Sonoma County, Mendocino County, Lake County, Napa County, and all the communities that we work with through this process. And I'm really happy that we were able to meet the metric, at least 99% of getting the debris cleaned up in early 2018. So with that, now I'm going to turn it over to my partner, a great partner, Federal Coordinating Officer Bill Roach from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. FEMA has been at the hip with us, right from the get-go, and I can't thank them enough for their continued support to all of us here in this disaster. So, Bill Roach.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Mark. My name is Bill Roach. I'm the Federal Coordinating Officer on this event out of Region 9. Our offices are in Oakland. I want to reiterate some of the points that my partner at the state said. For one, we have an incredible, really an incredible working relationship with the state of California. That has benefited us at all levels, and without that, we wouldn't be getting done what we've gotten done thus far, and there's so much more left to do. To Mark's point, the federal government's here to help coordinate solutions, recovery solutions at the state and local level. I can't say enough about the local level and the relationships that we've built both at the state and federal level with the locals to get solutions. Early on, task forces were set up at the local level for both debris and housing that gave us ideas at the federal and state level so we could come to some solutions on housing folks that had been devastated and didn't have places to go, both through the early on process of housing and then the interim housing piece, and then ultimately to getting them to rebuild or do whatever they choose to do in the recovery. We know emphatically that people are still hurting. We're hurting right along with you. I've got staff in my own Oakland office that were directly impacted because they live in this area as well. So this is, to Mark's point, one team, one fight. It all started with debris. It doesn't end with debris. I think we've done a tremendous job collectively to get ourselves to this point. Still got work to do. We all know that, and we're not going away, both on the debris issues nor on the longer-term recovery impacts that we have to address, whether that be housing or any of the other things. The debris mission was a very complex and difficult mission to take on. 2.2 billion tons of debris, hazardous debris, that have been removed, and with the help of US EPA, Cal Recycle, USACE, and all the other state agencies and federal agencies, I think we've gotten us to a very good point now, so we can start focusing on helping in other areas. I would like to just say that be remiss, SBA also provided over 1,200 loans for somewhere in the amount of $155 million to help survivors make decisions to rebuild. So still, finally, I want to thank everybody behind me, all the agencies involved, others that aren't here, and of course, all the way down to the local level. Now I want to hand it off to Colonel Eric McFadden, the commander of the Southern Pacific Division for the Corps of Engineers, that has been a monumental partner here with us in driving and managing the debris operations. So thank you.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, it's my honor to be speaking here in front of you, provide you an update and wrapping up this very important work. And it's just to reiterate the fact that you've heard throughout the morning, we're not done yet. First, I do want to echo on behalf of our entire U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, heartfelt sympathy for the victims and survivors of the October wildfires. Since the onset of the mission, I've personally visited many of the impact areas and spoken with those who lost so much in this fire-ravaged region, and I cannot fathom the impact this natural disaster had on victims and families. But I can assure you that our team here today are very proud to play an important part with the recovery effort and the reconstruction effort that's currently ongoing. Our role here has been one of supporting our local, state, and federal partners, removing eligible fire debris so the people living here can begin the task of rebuilding their homes and communities. As the lead agency for the Emergency Support Function 3, FEMA called upon the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in October to execute a massive debris removal operation. This program, in partnership with the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services And we've been working tirelessly ever since to accomplish this mission as quickly as safely as possible, while taking great care to minimize the environmental concerns in dealing with the contaminated material and show our deepest respect for the property owners throughout the process. Like many of our soldiers and civilian employees, I've been deployed around the world. What makes this deployment for our team so important is that the mission that we've had distinct privilege of deploying to help the people living here in Northern California. And in fact, many of our personnel that work in San Francisco area and Sacramento area are from this area, and some did lose their houses. And it was their honor to be part of the mission, and it's our honor to be part of the community that helped rebuild this. To date, we've had more than 850 volunteers from across the Army Corps of Engineers deployed to this region, and many of these people have been away from their families and friends for several months. And I assure you they wouldn't be here if they didn't care deeply about this effort that's ongoing. This mission truly took a unity of effort, working together to tackle the largest debris removal mission in California since 1906. The success of this joint endeavor is evident as we continue to see restoration efforts underway. To highlight some of that, we are 99% complete as of today, having removed 2.2 million tons of debris, which equates to nearly 314 square miles of fire area that's been cleared. 4,272 of the parcels have been cleared, tested, and we've notified the county that they're ready for rebuilding. However, I do want to reiterate there's still work to be done, and there's still work that's ongoing, including closing out issues and concerns that have been raised by property owners through our debris removal information line, and the financial and administrative actions necessary to provide parcel completion reports for every property to FEMA and to close out the contracts. I do want to conclude this by saying I've been in the Army for a long time, and I don't recall the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers ever being tasked with a debris removal mission of this size and scope. For the Corps and our partners, some of the efforts we undertook to complete these complex tasks, we were truly in uncharted waters, and we were innovating as we go, in some cases on a daily basis, to figure out the right solution for the right problem at the right time to rapidly reconstruct and move on to assist the survivors moving forward. I assure you that our team here today and our team that's been here on this entire mission truly takes great pride in having the opportunity to have served the people of Northern California as they recover from such an enormous widespread disaster. And in closing, I want to reiterate, it truly takes a community to rebuild a community, and we're honored to have been part of this community. I want to thank everyone here and everyone within these communities for allowing us to do that. It's my pleasure now to introduce the Director of U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Enrique Manzanilla from Region 9 Superfund Division. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Enrique Manzanilla. I'm the Director of the Superfund Division of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency at our office in San Francisco. I really appreciate the invitation to be here with you today. You know, at the height of this response, EPA was able to gather almost 300 EPA staff and contractors to respond and to work with all our partners here gathered here today. Two individuals are here with me that were part of that group. Michelle Wittrick from our press office, who I think many of you got to know during the course of this response, and Steve Kalanog, who was my incident commander during basically 80% of the time frame of our involvement in this major response for us. You know, we got boots on the ground in mid-October, and we began the process of removing household hazardous waste from focus first on Napa and Sonoma counties, and then expanded to Lake and Mendocino counties. We surveyed thousands of burden parcels to locate and ensure the safe removal and disposal of household hazardous wastes, paint solvents, pesticides, propane tanks, other types of hazardous materials. We completed 95% of our assigned mission within the first month of being on the ground. After that first month, we began to work to assess and remove asbestos from burned buildings in those 4 counties. And this assessment, excavation, disposal work was just completed last month. So in terms of numbers, we collected household hazardous waste from over 6,500 parcels, and we collected asbestos-containing material from over 700 parcels. In total, we collected over 2,600 tons of household hazardous waste and almost 25,000 cubic yards of asbestos-containing material. You know, we've done this in other wildfires in prior years, but the scale of this was unprecedented for us as an agency. And of course, we wouldn't have been able to do the work we've done without a tremendous effort on the part of many individuals at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, not just folks at U.S. EPA's office in Region 9. You should know that there were people here from our Denver office, our Seattle office, our Dallas office, many individuals. But of course, the collaboration of all the people gathered here today and others, like our friends and colleagues at Cali EPA. Lastly, I just want to, like others have done, to acknowledge the residents of these communities. You know, we did a lot of good work. The work still continues, obviously, and I want to acknowledge that these residents suffered a tremendous devastating loss, but I have, and my colleagues at EPA have, a high degree of respect for their resilience. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes our speakers, and we'd now like to open it for a question and answer period.
Today's conference is really an update to provide you an understanding.
All right, guys, so a pretty sad scene there in Santa Rosa, California, as they are going through this wildfire damage and continuing to update us on that removal process and how people are getting through it in California. Also, unfortunately, some sad news back home here today. This morning, we learned that the Baltimore County executive, Kevin Kamenetz, he was a candidate for governor of Maryland for 2018. He actually died this morning after a heart attack, cardiac arrest, and there was a press conference updating on that this morning. But sad for a sort of on a local angle. He was an up-and-coming, like I said, candidate for that race coming up later this year. And this morning, officials updated us on what happened there, and so we're going to hear from them now before we switch it to something else. Remember, you're watching our live streaming program here in the newsroom, Fox 5 Live. Anything live and breaking, we're coming at you from all over the nation, all over the world. And you can follow us on social media, Fox 5 DC, on all platforms. So check out this press conference from this morning about the Baltimore County executive.
Condition again deteriorated, and CPR and Chestnut Ridge personnel continued to treat the county executive with CPR and defibrillation. The personnel from Chestnut Ridge defibrillated Mr. Kamenetz a total of 3 times prior to the arrival of the ALS team from Medic 19 out of the Garrison Fire Station. When Medic 19 arrived, they immediately began advanced life support measures, including administration of cardiac medications and airway management. Mr. Kamenetz was transferred into Medic 19 and prepared for transport. ALS care continued throughout the transport to St. Joseph. The medic was in emergency mode with lights and sirens the entire way to the hospital. 4 EMS professionals rode in the medic with the county executive, an EMT who was the driver, a paramedic, an EMS supervisor, and our fire department medical director, who is a licensed physician. At St. Joe's, he was immediately transferred to the care of the hospital staff. And at that point, I'm going to turn the podium over to Dr. Cunningham to talk about the hospital's role in his care.
Thank you. So per protocol, en route to the hospital, we were notified not of who was coming, but that a full cardiac arrest was coming to St. Joe's, so our team is fully prepared. Our nurses and emergency medicine physician were prepared at the bedside when Mr. Kamenetz arrived. He was in full cardiac arrest, receiving CPR, and he had a heart rhythm called ventricular fibrillation, which is very difficult to treat. Our team continued with the full advanced cardiac life support, attempting to further defibrillate him and manage him medically, and very unfortunately were unable to ever restore a heartbeat and pronounced him dead right around 3:20 this morning. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Were you aware of any heart ailment that he had beforehand?
No, not aware.
So you're not aware, or do you know that you're not aware, or?
So whether he had a, I don't know, right.
Explain what you said was an unusual, difficult to treat. What exactly was that?
So he had something called ventricular fibrillation, which is a sign of the heart not getting good blood supply at all. The heart is an electrical organ, and so it's normally conducting electricity in a very methodical and systematic way. And when the heart is severely damaged and not getting a blood supply, the electricity flows across the heart very abnormally. And so it's why we have the AEDs out in the community, because sometimes you can reverse that with a defibrillator. Unfortunately, his was, I think, to the point of just not being able to return to normal.
Describe whether or not this is a common thing you all see frequently in your business.
Cardiac arrest?
Well, in the arrhythmia that you're describing, is this a fairly common thing?
This is a very common arrhythmia that we see when somebody has a cardiac arrest, yes. Common with a very serious heart attack. And sometimes can be resuscitated in the field or in the hospital, but many times cannot be.
We just had a description of the life-saving efforts, which included the AED or something like it, which many people see in their workplaces and other places. Could you describe the importance of those devices, regardless of the outcome here?
So prompt defibrillation of this ventricular fibrillation can often restore back to a normal heart rate, and has been life-saving in several instances. So the sooner that you can apply it and begin defibrillation, hopefully the better the chance that the patient will survive.
And does this happen in healthy people, or does it happen in people?
It's often most associated with somebody who's having a sudden cardiac event, usually a sudden heart attack. Rarely we will see it just happen spontaneously in a young person, but that's much more rare.
Could you talk to us a little bit about how far away Mr. Kamenetz lives from the firehouse, and whether or not you have any information about why he and his wife made a decision to go there as opposed to call from home? Anything like that you could share with us, please?
I'm not certain of exactly how far from the fire station he lives. I do not know why he made the decision to drive to Chestnut Ridge rather than to call 911 from home. We just have no way of knowing that.
So earlier, I think it was in the press release, you had written that he woke up feeling ill and complained that he felt ill. Is that part of the timeline? Did you wake up feeling ill and then go to the Chestnut Ridge? And did that push back the timeline of events at all?
No, not really. I mean, that is our understanding, that he woke up at home, said he was not feeling well, and said that he wanted to go to the Chestnut Ridge Volunteer Fire Company. Again, why he made that decision as opposed to calling 911 from home, I can't answer that question. I just can't answer that. But it doesn't really change the timeline at all.
A question for the doctor, if I might. Given the type of heart attack that this appears to be, and the decision that was made to go to the volunteer fire company instead of calling 911 and the time that elapsed in that, would it have made a difference had they called 911 and been treated directly by EMS and then taken directly to the hospital, as opposed to the steps that were taken in between the time that he was taken to St. Joe?
I really don't know. Obviously, with these conditions, time is everything, but I don't know for how long he was suffering at home with chest pain or symptoms before he chose to do that. We obviously always really strongly urge people with sudden symptoms like this to call 911 to activate emergency care as quickly as possible.
Is that the type of thing that would actually go from your sleep usually as well? Because oftentimes people that have cardiac arrest might not even wake up.
Right. So, but pain in your chest would often wake somebody up.
How long can you survive with your heart not beating? I mean, how long until you start getting brain damage?
Oh, just minutes. Yeah.
I think for anyone who maybe called a loved one this morning and said, you know, got me donuts or, you know, I love you, that kind of thing, there's the question of was this volunteer fire station perhaps on the way to the hospital? That's like, you know, was he perhaps in the car going to the hospital? You could understand if you felt too bad, just pull over here. I know there's EMTs. Can you give us an idea of maybe the route he would have taken? Was this on the way?
Yeah, we have no idea. We just can't answer that question. We're not in a position to answer that question. What we know, the facts as we know them, are that he made a 911 call from the parking lot, it appears, of the Chestnut Ridge Volunteer Fire Company. Why he chose to make that decision, you know, or whether he had some other intention, that's not a question that we can answer.
Doctor, if someone has a heart attack or severity, would it be something that they would know over time? Would it be small things that may have happened?
Sometimes, and for background, I am an emergency medicine physician, so sometimes patients will have symptoms, beforehand where they've gotten a little bit of chest pain or shortness of breath when they're exerting themselves. But other times we've seen, marathon athletes running and with no precipitating signs at all and collapse. So everybody's different.
She gave us a detailed account of what occurred, and the doctor made a point of saying he didn't know who was coming. This is a Baltimore County citizen like everyone else. Could you characterize the response and the way you dealt with this, and whether anything special happened, or is this the kind of care that's demonstrated throughout the county at all times?
Our review of this call shows that it was handled the same way as we would handle any call where someone showed up at a fire station or any 911 call. I mean, we had a patient that was dealing with a critical medical situation, and the response reflects exactly that. One thing I do want to clarify, I just was getting a little bit of information from Rich. Our information is that he lives about 2 miles from that station. I know it was nearby, but I didn't know exactly how. I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
The medical director.
Yeah. So a typical response for that is we have ALS and BLS units that are out there. Advanced life support units can provide cardiac medications and some advanced procedures. With that, we also have EMS supervisors that are in the area that cover and oversee portions of the county. With this, there was a call made to the medical director. I'm not sure how. The medical director, I believe, is also lives very close to the Chestnut Ridge Volunteer Fire Company, and I believe he may also be a member there, and he would get some of those alerts. He responded to the scene to assist with our EMS supervisor and the ALS and the BLS crews.
I have one question for you. In the initial response by the volunteer firefighters that were there, did they do everything that the paid responders would have done?
Absolutely. So when they got there, and from what it sounds like, there was 2 people that were sleeping there. When they came down, they took him in to their station, and as they were interviewing him, he subsequently deteriorated. And when they did, they immediately started CPR. With that, they maintained an airway. They started doing what everybody would have learned with CPR. Also, by doing that, they applied an external defibrillator. They defibrillated him and prepared him for that. They went over and beyond, started an IV because they had the equipment there, which transitions nicely when the ALS providers show up so that they continue the care. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. Is the ambulance and the medics that were in the ambulance with them, are they equally prepared to save his life and restart his heart as he would be at a hospital? Is that once you get him inside the ambulance itself?
So the majority of calls, and I'll defer also to Dr. Cunningham, for the majority of calls, when we get a cardiac arrest, there's very little difference in the first 10 to 15 minutes of the treatment that we're going to provide, whether it happens in the field or it happens in the emergency department. The crux of that, and people are asking the importance of CPR, the importance of all defibrillating someone, that doesn't change whether you're in the hospital or you're out of the hospital. There's things which are a little bit more advanced, like starting IVs, giving cardiac medications, advanced airway management, things like that. Our paramedics are equipped to do that, and they do that all the time. So I would say for the first 15, 20 minutes of a cardiac arrest, shy of something that needs to be done by a physician, very little difference in care between hospital and pre-hospital on cardiac arrest management.
Right, and then we continue to follow the same algorithm. It's a very prescriptive algorithm of when you we continue the same algorithm, so it's very prescriptive as far as when you defibrillate, how often, what meds you give, and how often, and so we continue on that same algorithm.
And I might have missed it. Can you repeat what time you arrived at the hospital?
I don't have it memorized, but I believe it was right around 3 a.m.
And was his heart stopped?
There was not, he was getting CPR. It was not spontaneously pumping at all.
And is that from 2 a.m. when he himself made the 911 call to the time he was pronounced dead at 3:22? Is that time period normal for the heart attack?
So I'm not sure what you mean by normal, but yeah, so it's probably, it sounds like it was about an hour from the time he actually collapsed until the time he was pronounced dead, and that would be a significant period of time to be doing CPR and putting somebody through the protocol of advanced cardiac life support. So I think really everything was done for as long as was reasonably possible to manage his condition.
So they revived him 3 times?
No.
Oh, I thought.
They defibrillated him several times.
That's different than reviving.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that is then?
It sounds like when he first collapsed, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when he first collapsed at the station, they defibrillated him, and he may have gotten a pulse back after that first defibrillation, but then that rapidly deteriorated again into ventricular fibrillation, and subsequent attempts to defibrillate did not get a pulse back.
Can I clarify something? I just want to clarify something. After he lost consciousness at the station, he never regained consciousness again.
Just a pulse.
Just a pulse. They were able to get a pulse back at one point, but he never, if you're using the term revive as in he came to or regained consciousness, once he collapsed and lost consciousness, he never regained consciousness again after that.
Elise, a quick clarifying question. I want to make sure I'm clear on this. The county executive himself made the 911 call?
That is correct.
But during that hour of unconsciousness, he's not being oxygen.
Well, they were effective CPR, and they were managing his airway. They were doing everything they could to keep his circulation going, but it's never as good as your own heart beating on its own.
And Elise, since you are the spokesperson for
Yeah.
the county government, what happened? What is the process? Who's in charge?
Okay.
What's happening now?
Yeah, I can answer that briefly, and then for more detailed information on that, I'm going to refer you over to Don Moeller in the county executive's office. But the short answer to your question is that the county charter specifies that the county administrative officer, who is Fred Homan, serves as the acting county executive until the county council appoints a replacement for the county executive to fill out his or her term. So Mr. Homan is in charge of the county as we speak, but the charter stipulates that he serves in an acting role until the county council decides on a replacement to fill out the county executive's term.
So do you expect him to speak to us today?
I cannot speak for Mr. Homan. I would refer you to to Don Moeller to answer that question.
You had an opportunity to talk to lots of people within the county this morning as part of your job. Could you characterize for us just the sort of reactions among colleagues and everyone, please?
Right. Well, I got a phone call around 2 o'clock, well, after 2 o'clock, because this happened around 2:30 this morning, and I certainly was totally shocked, as anyone would be. I've known the county executive since since the early 90s, when I was an editorial writer at the Baltimore Sun, and he was a first-term county councilman. So some of us have known him for a very long time. I was there when the chief of staff was making phone calls to let people know, and people were shocked, and there were a lot of tears and disbelief. I mean, when someone who seemed to be in the peak of health yesterday isn't with you today, it's just a shocking thing, and it's difficult to absorb. And I think that in the county government community, people are still struggling to absorb the fact that this person is just not with us, and it's going to take a little bit of time, for a lot of people to process that.
As a person who served both in government and on the outside of government, can you offer some thoughts about his importance and legacy in modern county history?
Well, I mean, he's been a public servant here in Baltimore County for a very long time as a councilman and as a county executive. And, obviously he was a candidate in the gubernatorial race. I'm going to leave it to, you take me a bit off guard with that one. But I think we're all still processing, the loss of someone who obviously is arguably our most important figure here in government.
When is an autopsy going to be performed?
I'm sorry?
When is an autopsy going to be performed?
My understanding is that his family has declined to have an autopsy performed.
I have a question for the doctor. I think you may have been asked if you knew he had a history or had a heart history problem. I'm wondering, with somebody with this condition that he had, would the symptoms have been exhibited earlier? Or could there have been warning signs that others who may be watching this can look for?
Yes, I mean, not in everybody. So some people just come in out of the blue having been seemingly perfectly healthy, but other people might notice that they're getting some chest tightness. Like typical story would be, I was exercising regularly with no problem, and now when I get on the treadmill, I notice at the end I'm getting a little bit of chest tightness, or I feel a little bit more short of breath, and actually that's gotten worse. Last week it happened a little sooner, and it was more intense, and so you'll hear this pattern of escalating symptoms of usually chest tightness, shortness of breath, sometimes nausea, sometimes sweatiness. I don't know if he was having any of those things prior to this.
So the short answer is yes, the symptoms could be exhibited, but not always?
Correct. Correct.
Now we talked about the personal history and potential whether or not he had a pre-existing condition. At least since you've known him for well over 2 decades now, are you aware of any family history of heart disease or anything?
Yeah. No, I spoke, that was obviously a question that I asked this morning when we were preparing for this briefing. And the answer to your question is no. By all accounts, he appeared to be in excellent health. He saw a doctor regularly. You've seen him. He was not overweight. He was a person that ate well. He liked healthy foods. He did not have any health issues that anyone was aware of. So that makes this even more of a shock for people to deal with. He liked yogurt and granola and things like that. So this was not a person who had unhealthy habits. So we're not seeing anything in his history that would indicate that a sudden event like this would happen. Anyone else? Yes, it did. Yes.
Yeah, guys, so definitely some sad news on the local level of government here in the Maryland area. If you've been watching with us today, we've been sort of recounting some of the stories, some of the top stories from this morning. And obviously, no mention of the president today, or no real video footage yet, because he is on his way to Indiana, where he'll be with Vice President Pence in Elkhart, Indiana, for a campaign rally tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So we'll be bringing that to you on our live stream on our Facebook page, so definitely check us out there. We're at Fox 5 DC. But speaking of the president, this morning he welcomed the 3 American detainees from North Korea back home. They are currently undergoing evaluation at Walter Reed, and we have a couple of those stories, including that story, as some of our top stories today. So take a look.
No doubt one of the world to see, a victory for sure, but just one step in a larger process. It was a made-for-TV moment at Andrews Air Base this morning. President Trump and the First Lady emerging from the plane that carried 3 U.S. citizens to freedom. The 3 men appeared to be in good health, and the president was plainly thrilled.
I got to speak to them on the plane. These are great people. They've been through a lot, but it's a great honor.
It was another burst of diplomacy with North Korea that made it happen. The regime of leader Kim Jong-un released these images of a meeting between Kim and U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo that led to the deal.
I really think he wants to do something and bring that country into the real world. I really believe that, John, and I think that we're going to have a success. I think this will be a very big success.
The possible Trump-Kim summit is the next step. The president says the details have all been worked out, and there is speculation it may take place in Singapore next month. And while the release of these men is a positive sign, the more difficult work is still ahead.
It's a confidence-building measure. It shows that they're trying to establish trust and make some good gestures in the lead-up, but it also can mean that they expect something in return, something we may or may not be willing to give.
And that really invites the question, what does Kim Jong-un want to get out of this? And is he willing to put his nuclear ambitions on the table? In Washington, Doug Luzader, Fox News.
Sacred Heart Church in Pahoa, a place of worship that stands tall in the town. But for folks coming here today, it's hard to stand tall under the weight of their worries.
My kids are safe, and our dogs are safe, and we have each other, but we just want to go home. It really just comes down to that. We just want to go home.
And it's a beautiful place and beautiful people. So it's been a good run.
John has lived in Leilani Estates for 3 decades. The lava hasn't consumed his house, but his home is still a casualty.
It's pretty well damaged. You know, it's a slab on grade, and the cracks run under the house. A lot of the vegetation has died. The trees are dying, you know, from the earlier heat from the cracks.
Sacred Heart Church is where residents can come to pick up a placard for in and out access. Connie says her home is okay, at least for now.
We initially left, and yeah, 80% of our house is still inside. You can only take so much stuff, but we have a place to go.
Governor Ige toured the area today and met with residents.
You kind of lose perspective until you're actually on the ground and seeing the lava flows and how it just erupted in the middle of the subdivision. You know, the vents are still steaming and there's gas coming. And you can see how close the homes are to the vents.
It's stressful. I mean, we're all under a lot of stress. We have friends that live down on Makamai and Lani Kuna Gardens, and for them it's been like hour by hour. So there's really no good in this situation.
We all knew it was coming. We knew it when we bought it. The good news is that the surrounding available property is getting really, really cheap. You know, if you worry about those kinds of things, you probably really don't want to be here.
The Hawaii County Civil Defense says 10 homes were evacuated on Ala Ili Road. The fear is that those residents would have no way to get out if another fissure opens up on that road. County officials say more fumes were spotted coming out from a crack in the road earlier today, so as a precaution, it was best to get the residents out. The move is discouraging for those who live anywhere near the area.
It's just a really traumatic situation. A lot of uncertainty, you know, really unfolding minute by minute. We don't know what to expect. So.
I mean, it's an emotional roller coaster. It's up and down, and at one moment you're meeting your neighbor who lost your house and you're down, and the next minute you find out that they had insurance and so you're up, and you just want to cry and hug everybody because everybody's in the same situation.
It's been barely a week, but the emotional toll is wearing residents down.
I really feel bad about the other homes, though. It's very sad leaving the island. But there's a lot of amazing people helping out people right now. I couldn't believe it. I asked for help for someone else, and everyone was on board.
But residents remain resilient and are counting on each other to get through all of this.
Because we don't know. It could be 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 days. We don't know. LA is not done with us.
I think just have compassion and have aloha. I mean, people are going through some very heavy, serious stuff right now.
As for those evacuated Leilani Estates residents, the plan is still to let them back into their homes from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. to get more of their belongings, as long as it's safe. Manola Morales, KHON 2 News.
All right, so just a few of the top stories there for you guys that we've been covering, that some of our sister stations have been covering from across the nation. But I want to bring you to a live feed that's coming up next, guys, out of Philadelphia. It's a really interesting story. H.R. McMaster Sr. He is the father to H.R. McMaster, who was the former national security advisor for President Trump. He died in April from what they say was blunt head trauma in his nursing home, in his care facility outside of Philadelphia. There was some suspicion surrounding his death. At first, they said it was an accident. Then they were saying that it was suspicious, and they were treating it as a suspicious death. Today, we're finding out that it has been reported that a nurse has been charged following the death of H.R. McMaster Sr. It's a 30-year-old nurse, actually, who was working at this senior living community outside of Philadelphia. And right now we have a bump shot up of what is to come, a press conference here in Philadelphia regarding this death, regarding these charges, and what exactly happened when he was found on the floor of his room in mid-April. So this is an interesting story where they're saying he was sort of failed to be checked upon and he fell, and now they are charging a 30-year-old nurse, according to reports, in this incident. So let's hear what they have to say. This is coming up shortly in a couple of minutes. Again, the nurse has been charged following the death of H.R. McMaster Sr., the father to the former national security advisor to President Trump.
Good afternoon. I'm Attorney General Josh Shapiro, joined today by numerous individuals. I'd like to identify them and then talk a little bit about why we're here. First and foremost, Jennifer Selber, our Executive Deputy Attorney General. Laurie Malone, our Chief Deputy Attorney General, in charge of our Medicaid Fraud Control Section. Nathan Ginter, our Deputy Attorney General. Chris Jason, Deputy Attorney General. And Michael Collins, Special Agent in the Office of Attorney General. I'm also pleased to be joined today by Detective McAndrews, Sergeant Hayes, and Lieutenant Davenport of the Philadelphia Police Department Homicide Unit. We are here today to announce criminal charges against a nurse for failing to provide care to a patient of a senior living facility known as Cathedral Village in the Upper Roxborough neighborhood of Philadelphia. That patient was Herbert R. McMaster Sr., and he died because of a criminal lack of care on April 13th at Cathedral Village. We are charging a licensed practical nurse who was responsible for Mr. McMaster's care, Christanne Gainey. She's being charged with felony neglect, involuntary manslaughter, and tampering with records. We are charging Gainey with failing to administer a series of neurological checks on Mr. McMaster after he fell in his room on April the 12th. Gainey could have saved Mr. McMaster's life had she simply done her job. Instead, she intentionally ignored her job responsibilities, falsified paperwork, and lied to her supervisors to cover up this inexcusable conduct. When a family selects a nursing care facility, they expect that community to provide a warm, comfortable, and safe place for their loved one to live and rehab. They don't expect their loved one to be found dead in the lobby of a place that was supposed to care for them. Let me be clear. My office will protect senior citizens in our Commonwealth using every single tool at our disposal. This nurse violated the trust that was placed in her by her patients and their families. She violated her legal duty of care that she had to provide for Mr. McMaster's well-being. We will hold her accountable for failing to perform her job and then lying about it. Let me walk you through the specific facts of this case. On April 9th, Herbert R. McMaster Sr. was admitted to Cathedral Village. Mr. McMaster, who was 84 years old, had recently experienced a stroke, and his family was hopeful that rehabilitative services offered by Cathedral Village would help him in his recovery. It's important to note that Mr. McMaster was a retired lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, and we thank him for his service. Due to his stroke, Cathedral Village staff noted that he had a high risk for falling. On April 12th, just 3 days after his admission, at approximately 11:30 p.m., staff found Mr. McMaster on the floor of his room after he had suffered an unwitnessed fall. These types of accidents are not uncommon in senior living facilities. If this nurse had simply followed the written protocols that Cathedral Village had in place regarding patient falls, she could have saved Mr. McMaster's life. Tragically, Christanne Gainey did not follow these protocols. Immediately after the fall, staff noted a small cut and some blood on the side of Mr. McMaster's head. At the direction of Gainey, Mr. McMaster was placed in a wheelchair and wheeled out to the lobby area. Under Cathedral Village policy, neurological assessments are required for patients who experienced unwitnessed falls to identify any decline or change in a patient's condition so that appropriate medical treatment can be sought if necessary. The fall protocol requires the following: close observation over the course of 72 hours after the fall. Specifically, the first hour requires neurological assessments every 15 minutes. This was not done by Gainey. The next 3 hours required hourly neurological assessments. This was not done by Gainey either. The remaining 5th, 6th, and 7th hours, Mr. McMaster sat in the lobby without a single assessment until his death at 7 a.m. All told, Gainey failed to administer 8 neurological assessments required under Cathedral Village fall protocol. Neurological checks, it's important to note, only take a few minutes to conduct. They require a test of motor and verbal skills, a measure of eye response to light, and a check of vital signs. Gainey did not perform one. Not one of these checks on Mr. McMaster, despite completing paperwork saying that she did. Gainey failed to perform her duty to perform those checks on Mr. McMaster during the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or any of those next critical hours. By the 7th hour, Mr. McMaster had died in plain sight in this lobby. Upon learning of Mr. McMaster's death, the Assistant Director of Nursing asked Gainey for the paperwork on neurological checks. When Gainey provided it, the nursing supervisor immediately noticed that the most recent check was done at 7:20 a.m., after the reported time of Mr. McMaster's death. Gainey admitted to falsifying the last check, and our investigation uncovered surveillance video footage from the facility showing that Gainey did not perform any of these checks as required on Mr. McMaster. Gainey falsified all of those neurological checks, not just the last one after McMaster's death. The chief medical examiner for the city of Philadelphia concluded that the cause of Mr. McMaster's death was blunt impact head trauma, with a contributing factor being the untreated subdural hematoma. The evidence clearly shows that Gainey intentionally, knowingly, and recklessly caused serious bodily injury to Mr. McMaster by failing to provide treatment of care. Our agents filed criminal charges and took Gainey into custody this morning at 9 a.m. without incident. The felony neglect charges carries a potential sentence of 10 to 20 years in jail upon conviction. The involuntary manslaughter and tampering with records charges are misdemeanors, each punishable by 2.5 to 5 years in jail. We will hold Gainey and anyone who knowingly neglects a care-dependent person here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania accountable for their crimes. The Office of Attorney General is focused on protecting each and every Pennsylvania senior from neglect, scam, and other threats. Our care-dependent neglect team, led by Laurie Malone, works zealously each and every day with local and state authorities to root out abuse and neglect of our seniors and care-dependent persons. In recent months, it's important for you to know that we have filed neglect and other criminal charges against a Luzerne County nurse, a Berks County man, and Erie County aide for failing to properly care for individuals entrusted in their care. My office will continue to prosecute those who neglect seniors and care-dependent people throughout the Commonwealth. But we are at a disadvantage in this fight because of a flaw under Pennsylvania law. We need reforms to the laws here in the Commonwealth to enable us to investigate more crimes against people living in nursing care facilities. Specifically, under Pennsylvania law, my office has authority to prosecute criminal neglect cases, but not abuse cases of victims living inside nursing homes. A good example of an abuse case is where a person is physically slapped or hit. An example, of course, of a neglect case is when an individual has a duty to provide care for a dependent person and fails to provide that care. I support expanding our authority under Pennsylvania law so we can prosecute both abuse and neglect cases. And I support House Bill 1124, sponsored by a representative named Jim Cox. House Bill 1124 would expand my office's authority. It would give the office jurisdiction to investigate and prosecute those who physically abuse seniors living in nursing homes. It would also expand our ability to prosecute neglect cases by removing the need to prove that actual physical injury occurred in order to establish the charges, meaning just the effect of the neglect would be enough to show there. This bill, I would note, has passed in the House and is currently pending in the state Senate. I want this authority, and I am renewing my call for the legislature and the governor to pass this legislation and give us that authority so we can better protect seniors and those who are care dependent here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I want to thank Commissioner Rich Ross and the Homicide Division of the Philadelphia Police Department for their assistance in this case. It was invaluable, and they do a tremendous job day in and day out for the residents here in Philadelphia. Nothing can ever bring Herbert McMaster Sr. back, and his family will always continue to feel the weight of his loss. There may be some who wonder, and some of you who may want to ask, whether or not this case received more attention than usual because Mr. McMaster's son is a prominent individual, the former National Security Advisor to President Trump. While it is true that there is certainly more interest in the media in this case as opposed to some of the other cases that we've prosecuted, we handle these cases all the same. We do it regularly, we do it with professionalism, and we do it in a thorough manner. It is a core part of our mission, and I really want to thank Laurie Malone and her team for their tremendous work day in and day out on these difficult cases. But if the prominence of Mr. McMaster's son, H.R. McMaster, brings a spotlight to these kinds of cases and helps families to ask the right kinds of questions when they put their loved ones in these facilities, well, I think that's a good thing. And I know the McMaster family agrees with us on that fact. They want to ensure that something like this never happens to anyone else, that no other family should have to suffer the loss that they've suffered as a result of this type of criminal neglect. My office is serious about protecting care-dependent Pennsylvanians. We will not ever hesitate to enforce the law and prosecute neglect cases wherever we find them. We will hold Christiane Gainey accountable for not providing Herbert McMaster Sr. the care that he deserved, the care that would have saved his life.